The following is a presentation from Ronni Gorman of United Way on the evaluation of the United Way Social Impact Investment Funds for Regent Park. This presentation was made to the April 11th, 2022 meeting of the SDP Funding Committee, a subcommittee of the SDP Planning Committee. The Funding Committee meets bi-monthly and is dedicated to identifying funding for the work of the Regent Park Social Development Plan. Let's hear what Ronni Gorman has to say.
Excellent. Happy to be here. I know I missed the last meeting, but generally I am at the Funding Committee meeting, so it's great to see everybody. I'm going to go through the document that everybody was sent as a pre-read, which is the evaluation of the Regent Park Social Impact Investment Fund, which we affectionately call SIIF because otherwise it's too long. There are lots of acronyms, as we all know. So a little bit of context. This SIIF is an innovative approach to granting where donors and community have led a process supported by and administered by the United Way. This is now year 2.5 of a 3-year commitment to SIIF, almost 2.5, 2 and a little bit. SIIF was designed to support action working towards a healthier, more vibrant Regent Park community and to support agencies, residents, and grassroots groups in implementing actions related to the refreshed social development plan. I apologize for some of you. I know you've heard this a million times, especially if you were on review committees and funding committee, but I promise there's only a couple slides that give the history. So initially, United Way, the Daniels Corporation, the City of Toronto, and community service organizations came together to create the SIIF as a community-engaged granting structure. A fund of $1 million was created with support from Daniels, so they provided seed funding, as well as other generous donors. Grants were awarded from the fund to resident and grassroots groups or community service agencies and grassroots groups who are collaborating with one another. They were awarded for initiatives which address established community priorities as determined by the Social Development Plan. To support the SIIF, the refreshed SDP lent its community decision-making structure to the grant itself. The SDP was guided by 4 working groups, as you know, aligned to the 4 pillars of the plan. Working groups used a model of community collaboration where residents and community service agencies were both present. Prior to submitting any applications for SIIF, interested SIIF applicants were required to meet with the co-chairs of a working group connected to the SDP that their initiative was aligned with. This was to ensure that there was cohesion between the grant projects and the SIIF priorities. Working group members also sat on the grant review committee, as some of you did as well, thank you, to embed a sense of ownership over the grant review process. Through the SIIF execution, there were 3 grant review committees at 3 different points, kind of 2 pre-pandemic in person and then 1 post-pandemic online. Residents and community agencies supporting working groups and the review process provided advice on local priorities, and grant review committees made the decisions about the grant applications with support from United Way and the City of Toronto. So as far as the dollars, over 3 years, from 2019 to now, close to $1 million has been invested in Regent Park through SIIF. This has included 2 granting streams, so resident and grassroots groups received microgrants up to $15,000 for a period of up to 2 years, and to support collaborative efforts between grassroots groups and agencies for $75,000 grants over a period of up to 3 years. Both granting streams have been mapped to the goals associated with each of the pillars and required recipients to be rooted in the community, operating in Regent Park, or having operated in Regent before revitalization, and dedicating activities to Regent Park residents. For the first year of the SIIF funds, resident and grassroots groups were awarded grants of 1 to 2 years, and grants were awarded for 1 year, the last round of the SIIF. A little bit of context, there are currently 6 actively funded grassroots resident groups that are being funded and 3 collaborative agency grants. So there's a total of 9 active projects currently in 2022. 7 grassroots and resident projects have already completed a 1 or 2 year cycle for a total of 11 funded over the 3 years in total. That doesn't make any sense. 9 plus 7 does not equal 11. There are 16 projects that have been funded over the 3 years. There's approximately $1,000 that remains in the fund for the final year, and determinations are being made regarding distribution of these dollars to support further evaluation, capacity building, and potential grant extensions. So for the evaluation itself, which you were all provided with, the evaluation was commissioned by United Way Greater Toronto and executed by Taylor Newbury Consulting. The purpose of the evaluation was to determine the current model of the SIIF, highlight the roles of the stakeholders and community members, and provide recommendations for future iterations of the grant. Should they be expanded anywhere across the GTA, or should a similar grant be in Regent Park? The data collected included 18 interviews with key informants, including United Way, Daniels, the City of Toronto, community agency partners, Regent Park resident leaders, and a review of all relevant SIIF and refreshed social development plan documents. So I know there's quite a few of you on the call who were part of that 18 who did the interviews. So thank you to all of you who took the time. The interviews took place over the course of August and September, and the feedback was greatly appreciated. So huge thanks to those of you who did that. A lot of these slides are just reflective of the report itself. So if you've already read it, I apologize for the repetition. I just thought it was easier given the timelines to put it into slides. So for partners, partner roles and collaboration, as many of you know, United Way has been an early intermediary and administrator for SIIF. We were able to procure funders for SIIF, contributing to the existing seed funding from Daniels. So Daniels originally put forward $250K. We were able to bring that up to $1 million through private donors. Throughout all rounds of implementation, staff were available to provide support in an administrative and advisory role. Along with other partners, United Way has supported the Grant Review Committee, provided supports for community-informed decision-making frameworks for the committee, approved applications, as well as supported grantees along the way. The inception partners for SIIF included the City of Toronto, Toronto Community Housing Corporation, and Daniels. They were all part of the SIIF from the inception in various capacities. The city is coordinated with United Way to ensure funding opportunities are supported and not duplicative of the SIIF, and supported the integration of SIIF grant processes with the refreshed SDP. City staff also promoted outreach and participated in community tables, including the review committees. Daniels has contributed financially to the fund and supported the design of the fund with a focus on ensuring the grant would be connected to the SDP. Daniels has also been involved during the grant inception, collaborating with United Way and other partners to support the establishment of the SIIF. TCHC has sat on community tables, was part of inception, and has supported community outreach. Community agency partner organizations, there are many in Regent, and many services in the community were involved in SIIF throughout the joint agency and resident grassroots group grants, as well as trustees for grassroots group. Community collaboration was embedded within SIIF. The grant process is designed for community voice in various stages. Community has been consulted in shaping grant application criteria. Further, community co-led the grant application and review processes with residents who've been sitting at the table with community serving agencies. I wanted to mention this is a super high level overview. We know that inception partners maintained key roles in the creation and implementation of the grant overall. We also know that community agency partners, including but not exclusive to the Regent Park Executive Director Network and other networks, have had a greater role than what has been stated in this report in shaping the fund and the structure for SIIF implementation. So have residents. Okay, I will pause for a second before the findings because I know I spoke really quick, just to see if there were any questions about the history of SIIF.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind, Ronni.
Of course.
So, is this funding slated to end in a certain year, or is it coming out from an endowment?
It's slated to end March 2023. So we're 2 and a little bit years into a 3-year cycle for the $1 million.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay. So I also paused to stop talking for a second because I talk so fast. So please, if I do talk too fast, throw up your hand and I will bring it down a notch. I know we have a shortened meeting today.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The number of residents interviewed for the 18th, do you know that number?
It was approximately half. I can pull the number, but it was approximately half.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. There was at least 7, but I believe it was half. Oh, and I see a question in the chat, sorry. Oh, thank you. Okay, so as far as findings from the report, what has worked well so far with the SIIF model? So folks felt that neighborhood readiness for SIIF was crucial. So having several project stakeholders, they spoke to the need for existing community structures to be in place for community-led projects to be a success. So a lot of people spoke of the strength of the SDP, work groups, committees, existing processes already within the community, social structures, resident-led groups. Having a keen sense of community priorities were considered to be factors that could push the grant forward and were seen by many as being assets. Several stakeholders spoke to their strength in Regent Park prior to the introduction of SIIF as well. So having those structures in place before rolling out a grant of this nature was seen as a huge asset because there were parallels to be made with the existing structures in SDP. Also, what folks felt worked well was grant administration thus far. So as many of you know, United Way has been the grant administrator. This is my year and a bit overseeing the portfolio, and one of my colleagues did previously. But we did support convening the grant, developing the granting streams with residents and community, and procuring the funding beyond the initial seed funding from Daniels. In the role of administrator, United Way has also been well positioned to support both the grant application processes and the execution by overseeing the grant awarding processes and supporting grant applicants. Administrative and project management assistance were also offered to all successful grantees. We offered office hours where interested applicants could discuss the grant, discuss their ideas, ask questions about the application process, and we really sought to reduce potential barriers to access. I will, of course, throw in the caveat that COVID threw a little wrench in that because that was all in person for the first 2 rounds of the grant, and then moved to online for the most recent round of the grant. Oh, sorry, it's not flipping for me. There we go. Okay, what also worked well, a lot of people, and I would say probably mostly Inception partners, but I'm making a guess here. A lot of people felt that having donors who understand the complexities of community work was key. So the long-term impacts of this kind of community work was designed to support and not tied to specific measurable outputs. So people who donated their money didn't do it because they wanted to see, you know, this many people served or this many things happen. Those donors were linked to more difficult to measure outcomes, as we know, things like social cohesion and social capital. And so there weren't a lot of restrictions around how the dollars had to parallel with outputs. Having committed donors who have a nuanced understanding of this type of work and the challenges of evaluating it is a unique strength of the SIIF. So stakeholders noticed that as a strength, Daniels, the seed funder for SIIF, was also involved in other ways beyond their financial contribution. Along with United Way, Daniels has ensured that early partners aligned on SIIF priorities. Sorry, all of a sudden it's not flipping for me. Okay, also working well, SIIF overlapping with community priorities. So some people thought that this SIIF being designed to help residents, grassroots groups, and local agencies to act on existing priorities as identified by the existing SDP, and linking the SIIF to those previously defined areas of need, for example, the 4 pillars, as identified through comprehensive community consultation, awarded grants were able to address goals that folks thought were the most important to the community. A strength was also the resident-informed granting process. So resident involvement was intended to be ingrained in various SIIF processes by sitting on one of the 3 grant review committees, community tables, or groups related to the SDP and the SIIF. Residents were able to have a say in which groups the SIIF would be awarded to. Grant applicants were also required to connect with a co-chair of a working group, a resident leader, or an agency representative linked to one of the 4 pillars prior to applying. This ensured that all grant applicants and potential investments aligned with the wider vision of the community and the SDP. Okay, so flipping a little bit into what could be improved. Through the interviews, it was found that capacity building supports for all involved could be improved. The SIIF was intended to have an embedded capacity building support for grant applicants and grant trustees during all the granting rounds. Findings suggest that applicants had various levels of need, some surpassing what was offered as far as capacity building and trusteeship support. At times, grant applicants required additional ongoing administrative, business, and project management support. And for some grant recipients, this included resources needed to get off the ground, how to leverage community connections, how to obtain in-kind donations or acquire community space for events. Depending on the trustee capacity and who the trustee was for these groups, some groups expressed that they were able to receive this. However, some key informants expressed that the support was inconsistent and not the same across the board. One of the grant committee members noted that some grassroots groups are more sophisticated than others. Overall, capacity building supports were appreciated by community stakeholders who were involved in the SIIF. However, the feedback suggests that the community needs should be better understood to enhance coordination of resources prior to groups receiving funding and executing their ideas. So based on this finding and having some dollars remaining this year to support additional work, we're also going to be working with partners in the community in the months to come to support further capacity building in the community for trustees, grantees, and groups who are interested in seeking additional funding opportunities. Also, what could be improved? More expansive community involvement. The SIIF served as a tool to benefit those awarded the grant, as well as community members who engaged in SIIF processes or benefited from the grant initiatives. Interview findings indicated that while many in community were successfully engaged in the SIIF, some equity-seeking groups, particularly youth, could have been more involved in SIIF processes. The duration of involvement in grant application structures were mentioned by stakeholders as potentially being a barrier to youth involvement. The frequency of meetings and the lack of a specific component geared to youth were noted by stakeholders as potentially negatively impacting youth participation. It was also brought forward that youth may not be formally organized enough to participate in the SIIF and submit applications, and that grassroots groups or agencies involved in the grant may be speaking on behalf of young people rather than engaging them directly. A stakeholder spoke to really defining what engagement should be for these groups to be able to better participate. This feedback mirrors a lot of what's been said in other evaluative processes previously within Regent Park. For youth involvement, continued outreach is required to support engagement, and there's recently, as we know, been targeted engagement strategies utilized by the city for the Youth Leadership Grant that can hopefully also further support engagement and involvement of young people in the community. More, of course, can and should be done to engage young people at the granting level, but also the work group and stakeholder level to engage youth from Regent in community tables and activities related to the SDP. Also, what could be improved is increased flexibility in the granting stream. So although it was seen as an asset that the grant was tied directly to the SDP and the 4 pillars, some folks felt that the granting streams being guided by these predetermined community priorities as outlined by the SDP, this was at times limiting and didn't allow for resources to address new or emerging community needs that may not have fit within the 4 pillars. Also, what could be improved is redefining the role of trustees. Trustees or community service agencies were engaged to oversee awarded grassroots groups. Findings have indicated that at times the role did not function as intended, with supports inconsistent between trustees and different groups. Some grant recipients found themselves needing more hand-on support, while other partners suggested the trustee role needed greater definition to support grassroots groups. Given the nature of the trustee and grant recipient partnerships, several stakeholders suggested that trustee mapping and training should be undertaken prior to matching the grant recipients and trustees. In some instances, it could be explored that grantees who do not have a trustee, rather maybe United Way, could serve in that administrative and advisory role. These are important findings for further granting in Regent as well as in other communities. Looking at how funds can be allocated to priorities outside of the SDP could be an area of focus for other granting processes outside of SIIF, given that this fund is coming to an end. But we'll be looking at ways to better support and redefine the role of trustees in the future, as the feedback in this area is highly relevant to ensure that groups are receiving consistent and relevant levels of trustee support when required. There may also be a role for community partners to provide capacity building in this area, which is something which will be explored in tandem with the capacity building feedback we've already covered in the months to come. So the overall recommendations: firstly, supporting everybody involved in the SIIF. So capacity building support should be available for all involved in SIIF, including grant applicants, grant trustees, and engaged community groups supporting SIIF processes. This would be a key element of ensuring more inclusion and equity in the work of SIIF. Ongoing support should be provided to enable communities to sustain the work launched by the SIIF. Grassroots groups, residents, and agencies should be equipped with the tools to lead and build on community initiatives and continue to advocate for community to funders and government. Just as a flag, this section of the report, if you took a look at the document that Diana sent along as a pre-read, it was titled Next Steps and Recommendations. But for the purpose of this presentation, I removed the words next steps, as the steps to follow are not inherently reflective only of the SIIF or only of United Way. But with funding currently coming to an end for the SIIF, the recommendations are important for all of us related to funding and granting, and the funding committee to keep in mind as opportunities become available throughout the community. But as was previously mentioned, we'll be working with partners in the coming months to support further capacity building in the community for trustees, grantees, and groups interested in seeking funding opportunities. Another recommendation was amplification of resident voice. So looking to the future, Inception Partners noted the need to continue to amplify resident voice, in particular ensuring that equity-seeking groups are present at the table and broadening the participation of community agencies involved in the SIIF. In creating committees comprised of residents and community-serving organizations, compositions should favor residents where possible, ensuring they have a greater voice in the projects that serve their communities. So our review committees, for those who don't know, was comprised of half residents and half community organizations. So there were 8 people in total. And they were also connected to the 4 pillars of the SDP. So there were 4 residents connected to the pillars, 4 community agencies connected to the pillars as well. When considering residents and agencies, some stakeholders suggested that involving residents who don't already have a stake in the community and who are not already embedded in community work could be beneficial. This could include youth, the drug-using population, and residents without permanent housing, who were mentioned by a former community stakeholder as notably absent in the SIIF processes. Okay, further recommendations: enhancing community buy-in and increased transparency. So create a process for more formal and enhanced channels of communication between grant recipients and working groups and the wider community, sharing local initiatives spearheaded by local grassroots and collaborative efforts. Excuse me, sorry. I will say that this feedback was known and had been spoken at the review committee level as well before this evaluation took place. And so for this round of SIIF, we have also embedded in the reporting that all groups who are funded by SIIF are expected to report back to their work group tables at least once annually, and they do have to report back that they have and when they did report back. There have also been initiatives spearheaded this round to connect all the groups to one another. So there was a sharing session that took place in February, where all grant recipients were invited to come together and share what their projects were so they could support each other with outreach, engagement, and understanding all of the different projects that had been funded within community. And neither of those things had occurred in the first 2 rounds, but based on feedback from the review committee for the last round, we wanted to ensure it was embedded in the projects that are currently funded. Finally, recommendation to reinvent the trusteeship role, which I'm imagining is also not new news across the funding committee. But it was suggested that trustee mapping and training needs be conducted prior to identifying trustees. And the capacity and type of supports or potential supports that trustees can provide need to be understood, cross-checked with a range of supports, and look at what the grassroots groups and residents may need. So having a bit of a mapping process in place was seen as being key. Okay, and overall, the summary and full evaluation, if you didn't read it, this was the majority of the report. I tried to plug it all into the slides so that you didn't have to read it in a short time frame before coming to today's meeting. So it was created by Taylor Newbury Consulting, and some of you spoke with them over the summer. Again, thank you very much, as well as myself and Alex from United Way. You can always reach out to me if you have any questions, thoughts, feedback about the report. My information is there, but it's also embedded in the pre-read that you were sent. And I am happy to answer questions if there are any, because I talked really fast, but it's already 5:30.
Thanks, Ronni. I have Walid and Gail.
I just want to start off by saying thank you so much, Ronni. This is such a comprehensive set of recommendations. I'm just wondering, will the United Way or will it be the consultants that will be, is there some sort of like an evaluation or an impact report? Like, are we documenting the deliverables throughout the various projects that were funded through SIIF to communicate? Because I want to make sure this information is easily communicated to the community with regards to the impact of the investment. So I'm just wondering, how is that being captured, and when will it be captured?
Yeah, so there are 2 pieces to that. One, there is an annual report that comes out annually. Sorry, that's a bit of an oxymoron, but they do come out every year. That's put together for the donors who have donated to SIIF. It is normally passed around this committee. If it hasn't gone yet, I will make sure it does. So it just gives the annual impact of the projects that are currently operating, as well as the ones that have finished in the previous year. That's also a public document, so it goes up on Regent Park Social, etc. So if it hasn't made it there yet, let me know and I will send it around. I'll also make sure it gets to Ibrahim so it can get posted. But the larger part of that question is the goal is to do another evaluation starting this summer, kind of heading into the fall, so that evaluation includes looking at the impact across all of the projects, all of the reporting that those projects have done, the 16 projects have done over the course of the 3 years, projecting to the end. So we can take a look at individual learnings and impacts from everything that has been funded throughout. We didn't want to include that in this evaluation because we had just funded a new round in the fall. And so we didn't feel it was a big enough sample size to only look at the reporting and impact of the first groups funded, because they were the group the most largely impacted when COVID hit. So we wanted to make sure we could include all 16 projects, and that process will start in the summer. We will probably engage consultants. It may or may not be the same consulting firm, but to put together a final impact report that would probably be written in the fall to then be launched in the winter.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
Gail?
Ooh. Hi, everybody. So just wondering if, with all the feedback and recommendations that you've gotten, have you seen an improvement, maybe where you were looking for an improvement? So I know that the community asked to certainly provide feedback. So have you seen a level of, in terms of, maybe applications coming in, how those applications are written? Have you seen that improvement? Because one of the recommendations certainly was about getting more one-on-one time. You also talked about sharing amongst groups. And so that's my other question as well. If there are any groups here that went through that sharing, and is that an opportunity to bring that back to the working groups so they can get some learnings from that? And then the third question is around just this report. I notice it's very text heavy. So I was wondering if this is the pre-read, or is there something that is a little bit more non-text heavy that we would then be able to take and share within the working groups and with other stakeholders who are also applying for funding?
Got to get me with the 3-point questions, right, Gail? I had to write them down. Okay, so the first question was if there were noticed changes in the way the applications were written between the rounds. I will give the caveat, as I mentioned kind of in the middle of the presentation, SIIF has been part of my portfolio for the past year and a bit, but previously it was one of my colleagues. So the first rounds of SIIF, I wasn't involved and I wasn't on the review committee. And then the most recent one, I was. So there is that caveat where I didn't see them all come in both rounds. I can say that I did read them when I took on the portfolio. So I do believe the applications that came in for the round that I oversaw, which I do call round 3, because there was 3 rounds of review committees, they were stronger in the way they were written. They also showed maybe not always aligned, well, they did align with the SDP, but all of the applicants had spoken with a co-chair, had talked to a work group. So there were a lot more who joined for office hours to ask questions, and I did see a shift in that. I will also throw in, though, that round, I'm trying to remember the actual dates, because the review committee met in August, so I feel like they were due in July, if I remember correctly. There were less applicants this time around than the first 2 times around, and I'm attributing that largely to COVID. Everything was online. There weren't in-person office hours. There weren't in-person information sessions the way there were the first round. So going off the top of my head, I believe there were 12, 13 applications the first round. Someone from the review committee could correct me. And then there was 7 or 8 for this third round. So there was less applications, but I do believe that, having looked at the other ones, that they were more strongly written and aligned. As for the sharing piece, there is definitely one person on the call who was there, maybe 2, and I don't want to put them on the spot, but you're welcome to share the outcome of that. I mean, having that session with all of the funded groups, I think, was a great success, because folks were able to connect with one another in a different way. They had all applied independently as their groups with their trustees and didn't necessarily know the other people who were funded or have faces to put to names. There was at least 3 projects that were geared towards young people and had some element of recreation. And those groups hadn't connected with one another before we met together in February. So there was a lot of benefit in being able to do that. We met for 2 hours. We ended up going for 2.5 hours because everybody wanted to hear about everybody's projects. They all presented, which was great. I think there could be notes from, like there are notes from that because I did record it, but as far as sharing across goes, it sounds like there's been a lot of momentum, and that's being reflected back in the reporting that folks are doing right now. Those group reports were due by last Thursday. I'm still waiting for, I think it's 2, and then I'll be able to take a look at all the reports together and see, was there a large impact across some of that sharing as it relates to outreach and engagement. Finally, is there a less text-heavy version? There isn't yet, but I can definitely recommend and look at getting one if that makes more sense. I mean, this text-heavy version, again, can be shared across groups. It can go on Regent Park Social, but I'm happy to kind of bring down the text as well if that's helpful and just keep to like high-level bullet points. Also, if you feel it's helpful, I mean, depending on community knowledge of SIIF, a lot of the early pages could be struck so that it just has bullets around the recommendations, feedback, next steps, and what's worked well. So I could absolutely look at making one of that nature if that makes sense for community, for sure. I hope I got them all, Gail.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, any other questions for Ronni? Okay, I see no questions.
And no, I didn't
yes,
put her on the spot, but Mary did put in the chat because she did attend the get together, and she
Oh.
felt it was beneficial to see all the initiatives here from them all, and it was a good opportunity to organize.
Yeah, it was amazing. Sorry, just jumped in, but yeah, I really loved it. Getting to see all the residents come together, it felt like a celebration too. It was just, yeah, it was really positive event, and kind of made it feel like that spirit of supporting each other's events too was there. And yeah, it was great. So thanks for adding that in.
Thank you, and we will try and do it again as well. That's my hope, to do it again towards late spring.
Ismail's hand is up.
Yeah, so congratulations, what do you call it? I remember one of those ideation meetings a few years ago when we were conceptualizing what SIIF could look like. So amazing work so far. In terms of, I know SIIF is coming to an end, but are there any possibilities for SIIF 2.0? And what that could look like?
I don't know at this point if there are. Those conversations are happening kind of above and with others. So I don't know at this point if there are. There is the potential opportunity to look at whether or not some of the groups, so rounds 1 and 2, resident and grassroots groups were eligible to apply for 1 or 2 years because of the timeline of the grant. This most recent round, folks were only eligible to apply for 1 year, which will end in October because 2 years would have gone past the duration of the grant. So there is also the opportunity to look at, is there opportunities to support any extensions for any of those projects? So those are also conversations that are happening so that the projects don't end in October, but the fund goes till March. So how can we look at some of those bridges? Of course, that's dependent upon project success and reporting as well. So it may not be across the board, but those are conversations for sure that are being had right now.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
I do think those are key conversations for us, especially our relationship with the United Way. I know that the convener at the time was Daniels, but I do think that whoever is having those conversations, at least from this committee, we would encourage them to do so.
Yes, and they are continuing, and I will also, I mean, I can pull the numbers, but I will also say that United Way recently launched and approved their program grants, and there are now more funded projects in Regent than there had been previously. So some organizations that are connected to the SDP who hadn't previously been funded for 3-year cycles by United Way, not SIIF specifically, are now funded, which is fantastic.
Walid, that's the last question, and then we go to our next.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. The first one was regarding what you just said with regards to organizations that are now funded by the United Way that come from the community. How is that information captured? Like which organizations, and are they grassroots organizations? For example, ones that haven't had access to resources traditionally. So that's the first question. And then my second question is, has the pandemic impacted the way uh, the project proposals were implemented? So, was it with some learnings that we could take away with regards to how organizations were adaptable, and what did they do to adapt to either health, I guess, orders coming from our public health officials with regards to the pandemic? That's going to be interesting to understand. And my request is, I know there's demand for funding in our community. So is there any way in the recommendations that we could communicate the need for supports for the Regent Park community that could be much more intentional through what Ishmael just called SIIF 2.0?
I will do my best again with 3-point questions. So first of all, the CSS program grants, so that's the Community Sector Strategy Program grants, they're just in the process of being announced now. So that information will be shared with the funding committee as it gets announced. I'm not familiar with all of the groups, but from what I believe, the majority are not grassroots groups because they're intended to be solidified agencies that have nonprofit and charitable status. And most grantees received somewhere in the like 60K up to 100K annually over a 3-year cycle. So the majority are not grassroots groups who are funded through that stream specifically. The question around how did the pandemic impact adaptability, I think is a good one. It's definitely something we want to include in the final evaluation as we're looking at the impact of all the projects. I think embedded in that, it will be, I think the greatest learnings will come from the agency collaboratives that were funded for the entire time. So they were funded pre-pandemic, they were, because it's a 3-year 75K, so it goes all the way till March. Those 3 groups were, well, 4 groups were funded all the way from the start of the pandemic through the pandemic, had to adapt, had to shift what they were doing. And now, I mean, we're not post-pandemic by any means, the pandemic is still upon us, but are now able to operate in a very different way based on the public health restrictions. So I think it's an important question to include in the overall evaluation report. I will say for those grassroots groups that were funded initially and then the pandemic hit, there was definitely a lot of pivoting because the majority of those projects were events, activities, things to take place outside. But there was also a lot of flexibility on our end. So even if they were funded for 1 to 2 years, most of them did have at least a 6-month extension to be able to be flexible and adaptable within communities. So if they needed to wait a few months to do an outdoor event because indoor events weren't possible, we were able to make those changes and the projects were able to have a longer time frame to meet their goals. And then I forgot part 3. I'm sorry, Walid. I got 2.
Oh no, my third part was just like, how do we, does the recommendation capture the need of the community to have a 2.0 version of SIIF? That's all.
So conceivably, I mean, the recommendations are good. They also don't include though, like, what do dollars look like across the community? What else has been funded? What other funders are at the table? It only looks at this pool, right?
Mhm.
So I think pulling together something, I don't know if it's done as a committee or some sort of collaborative document that looks at funding over maybe the last year or 2 years
Mhm.
from all the different streams and what has the impact been. I think
Exactly.
that could make a stronger case because this is only looking at the one donor piece of funding.
Awesome, Ronnie. Thank you so much for that suggestion. I think I'm interested in making that happen. So if it's communicated in the report, that will help us make the case with the United Way funders and other partners and stakeholders.
Ines, you had your hand up.
So we got some funding from there. We did a lot of, for 2 years, the workshop. And then the pandemic hit and stuff. So we had to figure out, and it was amazing how the grant that what we did for the community. And another thing is, I know some of the people that got grants or agencies or groups. One, especially with the health center, the pathways, they got it for 3 years. We don't even know nothing of what's going on, what's happening. Like, you know what I mean? Because I know when we were sat in there and they said, well, you know, this is so important, da 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 da. But then after they got the money, it's like they vanished. how do you guys deal with that when it's, you know what I mean? Like you're getting grants for 3 years and then it's like, goodbye, thank you very much. Never see you again.
So I would say, well, a couple things just as a correction. Pathways was not funded by SIIF. It's called the Youth Enrichment Academy for middle school kids. So it's not, it is connected to Pathways to Education because it is the community health center, but it's not the Pathways program that supports high school students. And that's funded separately. So this is YEA, which is yay or yeah, I'm not sure how it's pronounced for the Youth Enrichment Academy. And there were definitely, I won't say struggles, but at the beginning, kind of the contract had to shift a little bit because their leadership changed. Not at the top, the highest level. We all know their ED, who's fantastic, but at the program level, the leadership had changed. And so that group is now more engaged, did attend the sharing session, and is reporting this month, is also expected to report back to their SDP work group this year. So I don't know about like vanishing over the course of time prior to me having the portfolio, but they have been engaged in the most recent steps that have been put in place to ensure that all of the groups are reporting back and sharing with one another.
But I think it would be really good to at least say, hey, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, this is, you know what I mean? Like at least come and say, because I know we've done it in the SDP planning, right? Yeah. Because we have to be transparent. Money coming in region, we have to be transparent to the members and the people in the community. Right? Yeah, because
I agree with you.
It's like us getting a grant from you guys, but I'm not going to tell you what we're doing, not keeping you posted on what's going on and what's happening. It's important to be transparent and say, hey, we're here. This is what we're going to do. Please support us or help us, something. Well, that's just my opinion. Yeah, I don't know how you guys think.
I agree with you. And as was noted in the recommendations, that was said a few times across people who spoke with the consultants. So this year it has been embedded in the reporting. The reporting is due this month. So for every group, whether it be a collaborative group or a resident grassroots group that reports to me this month, if they haven't already indicated that they've reported back to their table, they are going to be reminded that there is an expectation that they report back to their table to receive the remainder of their grant. So over the course of the next month, those reports are coming in and I'll be following up with folks. And if it indicates that they haven't reported back, they will be reminded that it is an expectation of them to report back to their work groups. And that's not specific to the one group that you made mention of. It's all 11 projects that are currently funded.
We did report whenever we did SIIF updates on the stakeholders table, YEY projects were they were put there as part of the report. But I guess the verbal report within the SDP planning, I know they're under community building, so hopefully they'll be doing that when they go to community building. So thank you. I have to stop this section. I thank you so much for your for the report and the updates and the questions that people asked and the answers. So I want to move to the next piece, and I know it's 5:10. Initially, I'd said we're finishing at 6 because we're respecting our brothers and sisters. We'll be going to run to breakfast. So if they can indulge us, maybe giving us another 10 minutes, extra 10 minutes, so we can just get another update on what's happening with our internal SDP review, deep dive process, internal deep dive process review. Just the quick highlights and then the next steps of that. So we are all understanding what will be the next steps for that. Okay, and Ronni, I think the United Way evaluation is maybe something that we can also learn from it as we are doing our own internal review process. Maybe there's some insights that we might get from that. I'm not sure who is going to be reporting on this. I know there are different parts to the deep dive.
Could I recommend Adonis start off?
Yeah, I'll start with Adonis. Okay.
Hi, folks. I guess so. There have been 3 sections of this report that we're working on in terms of the internal review. There is a section in terms of that covers basically the outreach, community outreach. It looked at the proposal form, everything prior to the deep dive itself. And then the second process, which was led by Michael, and that looked at the deep dive process in terms of what happened in the deep dive And then the third piece, which led by Abraham, was after the deep dive and looking at the city's submission. So those were the three pieces. I think all three pieces have been done in terms of recommendations from all three areas have been submitted. And now we're in a process of compiling. So in terms of, and we're just still sorting out who's going to compile that. So we're still in that process at this point in time, but we should be able to figure out. I think we have a subcommittee working on that as far as in terms of meeting next Wednesday. The highlights, very sort of a quick highlights, is that it was rather than have an open process in which anyone could submit a proposal related to the SDP funds, sorry, the city's funds, the group has recommended that all the proposals come from the working groups themselves. And I'll do a caveat before I say all the proposals, but essentially that all the proposals are within the group. So there's a real, in the outreach and encouragement of groups to get involved with the working groups. So we don't want a situation where groups are isolated from each other, where other groups don't know what they're doing, other projects don't know what's happening. So we really want to ensure that all the groups and projects who are getting funding are engaged in the working groups. We highly recommend that the working groups do some kind of process in which they identify all the priority areas of their working groups. And so that they sort of identify sort of the funding priorities that the group needs within the group itself. And then among them that they begin to basically prioritize which of the group of their projects and activities that they want to get funded. We also decided in terms of that each group, and again, it's just a recommendation. So these are just recommendations. So that's what you have to remember, that each group would recommend $100,000 in project activities, and have a process for identifying how those projects will be determined within the groups themselves. So essentially that whether that's consensus model within that group, however they want to make that decision, basically, I think that we're coming up with some guidelines as to how those decisions are made within the working groups themselves. So that's 100,000, and that's for the 4 working groups. And then 100,000 was also recommended that it comes from the SDP Planning Committee itself. And that 100,000 is for to identify emerging needs, to identify gaps, identify which identify if there are other projects that bring groups together. So that's left up to the SDP Planning Committee itself. So that's $500,000. Another recommendation that was put forward is that any grants, and again, this is still recommendations, I think the committee is looking at it, but any grants that are over, any projects that are asking for funding, even within the working groups for 50,000 or more, that they have to have some kind of collaboration process with another working group, that there's some kind of alliances or some kind of partnerships that are happening across groups. So that's again a recommendation that's put forward. Those are, I think those are generally the recommendations that have been identified. In terms of an overview, we also talked in terms of that the application should be that there should be, so when the projects that are put forward and have to go through the application process, that there is the application has some changes that reflect reflect what the work, how the projects are coming to the working groups themselves. So if that's a proposal, so there's a proposal form that the groups will use, that those proposals, some of the questions in those proposals related to evaluation and impact, related to salary guidelines and things like that, are also reflected in the application itself, so that people are not doing, our projects are not doing a double application that don't have much to do with each other. So those are, in general, those are high level recommendations. There are minutiae of recommendations as well, but those are the high level ones that I know of. And Michael has been steering us through this process as in terms of leading the overall sort of the planning of the group. And now we're looking at how we're going to put that report together and present it to the community as a whole. So those, and that's it for my part. I don't know if Denise or Michael wants to add to that, but that's where we're at this point. Or Abraham as well.
Ibrahim is not here today.
Okay.
Thank you, Adonis. Michael and anyone else from the committee, do you want to add something? When, especially the next steps? I know, yeah. Michael, yes.
Well, I mean, there's a meeting on Wednesday. I still don't know what my role in it is. Hopefully there'll be some mediation by then and things will be straightened out. But I guess it will come to the planning committee a couple weeks later. I don't think it could possibly be this week.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just one another recommendation. I just remember Waleed's point is that that we recognize that there's not enough resources for the community, and a major recommendation was to make sure that there is a recommendation for more support, more funding support. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for those. Yeah. So once the report, the draft has been compiled, I think we will have it at the presentation here as a draft, and then it will also go to the different groups. And another thing, I think the residents, there were some interview, they did a lot of surveys that we did prior to our own process. So those recommendations from residents, from those surveys that had happened, were also incorporated into this work that we're doing, just in case you're wondering whether residents were involved or not. Yes, there was a lot of surveys that happened prior to the internal review, and they were incorporated into some of the work that's been done. It's 6 p.m. Any questions on this? Anyone? Any questions? Okay. All right. I think there are no questions today. So I know so Wednesday, the group will be meeting to really, again, look at how to compile and who will be part of that. And I think, Michael, you will be part of that. The agenda, the meeting was sent out, the invite. I'm not sure if you got it. Then if not, we will follow up with you and give you the meeting invite. So yes, so with that, I think we can call the meeting to an end.
Thank you, Diana. Great facilitation as always.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out all of our social media platforms. For more information, check out our website.